Sanjay for inviting me. This is the second time I'm addressing a gathering in this hall. Last time I was here was in September. It is not very common that you get to address such a distinguished group of architects and designers. Today I have to fight lots of dishes. We had a very wonderful meal and I have to fight wonderful chicken, the sweet dish, because all those dishes are trying to make you sleep and my job is to keep you awake. India is a country of 1.3 billion people. But unfortunately, out of this 1.3 billion people, not more than 1 lakh people connect with contemporary art. Most people feel that art is for the rich, not for us. Most of the galleries are situated in rather five-star spaces, and a common person is rather scared even to go and press the bell there. So art remains only for a select few in this country, and I'm not talking about farmers and laborers who are deprived of engagement with contemporary art. There are many corporate heads, there are teachers, engineers, doctors, including designers and architects who do not get enough exposure to contemporary art. I'm going to just do a very simple experiment. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to judge you or anything. I have done this on many occasions. I will tell you 10 names. Subodh Gupta, Sudarshan Shetty, Riyaz Komu, Krishnamachari Bose, Vivan Sundaram, Vishwanathan, Pushpamala, Vasudev Gaitonde, Francis Newton Souza. Now, out of these names which I just uttered, I do not know how many names you have heard of. I'm not doing really a test, you don't have to tell me. But unfortunately, most people have not heard of these names. And these names are of contemporary Indian artists who are equal in their achievements to Amitabh Bachchan or Amir Khan when you compare it with Bollywood. And even financially, let me tell you that Vasudev Gaitonde recently sold a work a few weeks ago, just about this size, in a Christie's auction for 35 crores. So even financially, these artists have achieved a lot. But unfortunately, most people don't hear of it because where would you get an opportunity to see the works of these artists? There are hardly any contemporary art spaces in the country. And that's why I decided I will start one, and we have started the Museum of Goa, which is a space which intends to democratize art, to involve everybody in appreciating contemporary art. Art education is almost non-existent in most institutions, and sadly, including in architecture colleges and design colleges. You know, Michelangelo did a very good job when he constructed the St. Peter's Cathedral. Artists used to construct buildings. Artists did the job of architects once upon a time. Even JJ School of Art was art and architecture together once. And then slowly there was a divorce happening. And today the divorce between art and architecture is almost complete because there is very little art which is taught in architectural colleges. I was just speaking to Bijoy Ramachandran. And well, people like him and people like many of you who had an opportunity to go abroad and engage with contemporary art definitely would understand what I am talking about because here the exposure is very, very minimum. If you consider public art in India, again, it's a very sad story because either you go to contemporary art spaces or you go to public art, look at public art. Now, we have this statue. Now, politically, I will not make any comment on it because that is left to the politicians. But I dislike this statue basically because it's a bad statue artistically. 500 or more crores have been spent. And, well, it is a statue which is, well, it doesn't give you any feeling. Apart from that, it is Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, but it is artistically bad. Same thing they're doing now with Subhash Chandra Bose statue. Because if you want to create a memorial for some great leader, There's no doubt about the greatness of Subhash Chandra Bose or Vallabhbhai Patel, but it can always be an international or national competition where sculptors come and sort of propose interesting works. Look at that. Now you see the difference what I'm talking about? This is also a kind of a monument to politicians, but then it is world famous, not just because of the scale of it, but also because of the aesthetics of it. This is what we do. We have a replica of Eiffel Tower in Surat. Now, this is the kind of public art, and mind you, about 80-90 lakhs have been spent on this nonsense. And this is because I would make a very bold statement that the last public art of substance which happened in this country was in Hampi during the Vijayanagar. After that, hardly anything of substance has happened in public art. When I say of substance, I am talking about something comparable to Ajanta, Ellora, or some other heritage what we have. This has not happened for one simple reason. The kings who commissioned the sculptors, the artists to create Ajanta, Ellora, or any other Bhubaneswar or Khajuraho, they did not choose party workers. They chose sculptors because they understood what is good art and bad art, because there was sort of a tradition of appreciating art in the family, which is not happening today. And today, the public art is chosen essentially by politicians and by bureaucrats who have nothing to do with it, because if you have a heart problem, you would normally, you go to a doctor, your cardiologist. You don't go to the Secretary Health. So Secretary Health has no business to choose, to decide how to treat your heart problem. But here what is happening is art is essentially chosen across political parties by politicians and bureaucrats. And that is the reason why we do not have good public art in this country, because choosing public art is a serious business. Like building an interesting building is a serious business, not just anybody can do it. A qualified architect is required for it. And this is the reason why this is happening. Well, I will now like to talk to you about what is art. It is a complex subject. I will try to make it as simple as possible. Now, art is an expression of time. Why do people draw? Why does a child scribble? A child scribbles because the child wants to express. A child wants to express some kind of an inner world. And if you see the concentration of the child when the child is scribbling is unbelievable. It's completely concentrating on what it is doing. And so the child wants to sort of share the inner world with all of us, to a sympathetic viewer. So it is very wrong to tell a child, what are you drawing? Ask a child, what are you drawing? Or correct a drawing of a child. Picasso had this famous statement that every child is an artist, but it is very difficult to keep that artist alive in you in later life. And on this subject, I have done this interesting installation. This is a conditioning machine. What happens is, usually, a child is absolutely free, but the child is told, this is not the way a mango is drawn. This is, why are you making the tree pink? And slowly, the child is conditioned to sort of fit into the what is right and what is wrong, what the society feels. For example, I was always, every year I'm invited to be a judge or a chief guest in some function of something like Rotary or Club or Lions Club, where there is an annual competition which is about world peace. Now, when you walk around, every child draws a dove. Every child has the flags of all different countries. Every child has a mosque, a church, and a gurudwara. Now, a child has not thought about this. The child has been told by the parents and by the teachers that world peace is dove. World peace is people have to hold hands. Now, if a child is left alone, the child would draw something completely different and surprise you completely. So the child's creativity is just killed right at the beginning. And that is why we get completely conditioned and we are not able to appreciate art. To appreciate art, the first thing which is needed is basically absolutely clear, free, unconditioned mind. The only people who connect with art, who still live art, are the tribals. If you go to the tribal areas, the tribals don't buy art. Now, this is an adults also drew. And These are cave paintings which were drawn by adults. So adults also drew and they were unconditioned. And today, only the tribals are sort of the unconditioned people. And I would say that all of us need to become tribals as far as art is concerned. Because the tribals actually live art. The way they dress, the way they sing, the way they dance, the way they decorate their homes, they don't go and buy art. Art becomes a part of their life, and that's how it should be. Look at that. Look at, if you study the tribals of the world, I think there is a very wrong thing which has been done. It is called primitive art. I don't feel that any art which tribals do is primitive. It is as high art as any art existence. Even in architecture, look at what they do. So I think the tribals are the ones who really live art, and we need to learn from the tribals. I want to narrate to you a very nice story. In Madhya Pradesh, in I think 1985, they started the Bharat Bhavan, which was designed by Charles Correa, and Swaminathan was the first director. Now what he did was he had two exhibitions as inaugural exhibitions of Bharat Bhavan. One exhibition was of the tribals of Madhya Pradesh, because there are lots of tribals in Madhya Pradesh, and the other exhibition was of the abstract artists of that time. And they included Raza, Gaitonde, Swaminathan himself. And so the tribals came to look at the exhibition because the tribals were represented, and all the so-called educated people came for the inauguration of Bharat Bhavan, and Indira Gandhi was inaugurating it. Now, the educated people, the so-called educated people, stood in front of the works of Gaitonde and Raza and asked the question, what is the meaning of this? They could not understand it, because we are trained, most people are trained to find some meaning in some work. In abstract art, what is the meaning of this? This is some colors. But the tribals looked at it and said, wow, the tribals could appreciate it, but the so-called educated could not appreciate it. So basically, to understand art, to appreciate art, what is most important, that you have to become tribal. You have to become unconditioned completely. This is a sculpture by Gauns, Gaun tribal, and you'll be surprised to know that this tiger has traveled around the world. It has gone to almost every important museum of the world, and it is done just with logs of wood and just earthen colors. You know, for me, I will try to make it as simple as possible, a thing as complex as art. Actually, art is not complex. Art is the celebration of life. Art is got many functions, and it is a most important function of art is, we have inherited this world. We have inherited this life. Now, the function of art is to own it, to internalize it, to make sort of connections with yourself and your surroundings, with nature, with other people. The function of art also, in short, is to make yourself at peace with yourself and with the world, and to celebrate life, to depict life, to describe life like you do in poetry. So art describes. So I'm going to give you some examples. Now this is a work by Monet, a wonderful landscape. So now you see a landscape as a realistic landscape, but then artist's job is to sort of present his version of the landscape, his version of life. This is Monet's work. This is Turner. Actually, this is the ocean painted by Turner. This is, again, Monet's water lilies. This is my work of Goa's architecture. These are windows which I have painted in acrylic. This is the kind of work I did initially when I started my artistic endeavor. Now, when I paint these windows, actually the window is only an excuse. What I am painting is the sunlight. Talking about Goa's architecture, you travel from Gujarat to Kanyakumari, and the moment you enter Goa, even before anybody starts speaking to you, the houses start speaking to you. The Goan architecture, which is wrongly called Portuguese architecture, is a very important part of Goa's ethos. and it gives a special character to the Goa's ambience, Goa's culture. So I have been painting a lot of houses of Goa. This is painted in Portugal. It is similar to Portuguese houses, but not exactly. I have traveled all over Portugal. There's not a single house in Portugal which is like a Goan house. So Goan architecture is an architecture which evolved here with a lot of influences from European architecture. These are the verandas of Goan houses. These are all watercolors. This painting is done in watercolors. So one of the functions of art is to describe, to depict the Goan windows. You know, I was earlier a medical doctor. I ran a hospital. And many people ask me, what has your medical practice, in what way has it influenced your art? Many people feel that maybe I am very good at figure drawing, and so because I understood muscles and human body, but well, I hardly do any figurative work. But what happened was, most of my patients were fishermen. And so I could understand the life of the fishermen from a very close angle. And what I did in my work is basically to depict their life. You know, I practiced for about 8 years. Initially, many people ask me, why did you give up medical practice? Well, I never disliked medical practice, but I always loved art. And after 8 years of practice as a doctor, having a small hospital of my own in Kalangut, suddenly the tourism sort of developed in Kalangut, in Goa, and almost 60-70% of my patients were English tourists then. And only disease they were suffering from was loose motions. So the idea of devoting my life to British loose motion was not palatable. And I thought India has taken enough shit from the British for 150 years, so I didn't want to take any more. So I gave up my medical practice and I started doing art, and then I started depicting the life of the fishermen who were my patients. So this is a work where the fishermen perform to become the keel of a boat. Here the fishermen become the boat itself. Here the fishermen become the bone of the fish. So these works are basically talking about the inseparability of the life of the fisherman and the ocean. And then I went a little bit ahead and I decided to do videos of this kind of works. And this is a video where the fishermen are sitting holding hands, and then this is what happens. This is like rowing actions. You know, art always tries to sort of present to you what you normally don't see. My next work is also based on the same subject, how the life of the ocean, the life of the fisherman is inseparable from the ocean. But here, what I'm also trying to present is another view. Another view is how, if we have to talk about Goa's culture, or for that matter, culture of any coastal area as a sculpture, who is the sculptor? The sculptor is the ocean. Because through the ocean, people came, ideas came, religions came. So the next work is a performance with fishermen where I present this idea of how the ocean is responsible for creating cultures. So this is how I narrate, I describe the life of the fisherman and try to sort of show you something which other people might have missed. These are paintings of the fishing boats. When I was a little boy and I loved fishing boats, I used to make drawings of the fishing boats. I started doing paintings. Then I started liking the textures of the fishing boats, which are carved by the ocean, by the waves. And then I started buying the old boats themselves. Because the wooden boats are sort of getting extinct now. Most people buy fiberglass boats because fiberglass is less maintenance, they're lighter, consume less petrol, and so the fishermen don't know what to do with their old boats, so I buy them and convert them into sculptures. So these are sculptures created with old boats. When you create a sculpture with pieces of old boat, all the history of the sculptures of that boat is incorporated in it. All the stories of the boat, because even material has stories, and those stories get incorporated here. This is actually, I will talk a little bit about this work. This is called the Pepper Cross. When Vasco da Gama first landed in Calicut on the 20th of May, 1498, somebody had to go to the shore in Calicut to check out what kind of a reception is awaiting. So they sent a guy called João Nunes in a small boat to check out what is happening on the shore, because João Nunes was a convict, and if he's killed, he's killed. He's dispendable, because he had been picked up from the prisons of Lisbon. So he goes to Calicut coast in Kappad, and then he meets the two Tunisians, and these Tunisians are already there, because Vasco da Gama did not discover the route to India. He only discovered an alternate route across the Cape of Good Hope. Otherwise, Europeans came through the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. So João Nunes comes to the shore and meets these Tunisians, and they ask him in Spanish, "What the devil brings you here?" And João Nunes answers, "We come for pepper and we come for Christ." So this is a boat which is called Pepper Cross, because the Portuguese came to propagate Christianity and to control the pepper trade. If India did not have pepper, perhaps we would not have been colonized. This is a work I did at the Dubai Art Fair, where I took boats from Goa, the sculptures of boats from Goa, and presented them on the shore next to the Burj Arab. It was a very difficult task because you have to compete with the Burj Arab, and it's not very easy. But then the shapes were very similar, they were symbiotic, and that's how it worked. This is a work which was recently acquired by the Adanis for the reception of their new building in Ahmedabad. This is created with old wood from the port of Mandvi. The port of Mandvi was a very important port right from the 16th century, and they still, even today, they build dhows, big wooden dhows, which are not used for any commercial purpose right now, but for the recreation of rich Arabs, and cost about 15 crores, these dhows. And so I went there and bought wood from the old dhows, and I used that to create this disc, which has many, many meanings underlying it, because I have used some symbols from the Harappan port of Lothal. Lothal is a port which was about 2500 BC. It is one of the oldest port in Gujarat in the world. So the Adanis have two businesses in that building. One side is the port business, the other side is the power business. So this is a disc which was created with the material from old dhows, and this is a disc which is created from old electrical cables, electrical wires. So I just ripped them off, and the copper wires were used for creating this with some patina. This is with cowrie shells. So I create works like this. So this is a lot of things get incorporated when I create a work like this. All the history of the cowrie shells. This is a bronze disc which is called the moon and the tides. As you know, the moon is responsible for the creation of the tide, the high tide and the low tide. So I have the shells which represent the ocean, and the crescent moon is seen there in the border. This is a fish which I created with recycled used truck tires. So it's called karimeen, and it's almost the state fish of Kerala. So this is a huge karimeen. These are different lamps which I create. And talking about lamps, I will tell you an interesting story. When Dandi March happened, Mahatma Gandhi was walking for the salt satyagraha, and during this Dandi March, he comes to a small village, and he has to cross a river. Now this river, it's low tide, and there is no water in the river. It's muddy. and so muddy you cannot cross by walking. And you cannot use a boat because there is no water. So the villagers have a meeting and they advise that, okay, the high tide will come at 12 o'clock at night. At that time, you cross the river. So 30, 40 odd satyagrahis, they wait. Gandhiji is a very disciplined man, so he said, I'm going to sleep now and I will wake up at 12 o'clock. And so he sleeps. At 12 o'clock, he wakes up. The villagers have organized something very interesting. There is no electricity, of course, during this time. This is the 1930s. So the villagers light up small diyas. Hundreds of villagers stand up holding diyas on one side of the river. And on the other side, there are hundreds of villagers again standing with these diyas. It's almost like a biblical scene. And then Mahatma Gandhi crosses the river. Why I'm talking about this is, it is a simple diya, but it assumes such importance. Now, art basically also, why do we create these chandeliers? Why do we create these wonderful lamps? That's because basically it is celebration of the light. It is the celebration of our aesthetics. I myself have created many lamps in copper. So these are some of the lamps which some of you may use in future. Many of them are available in my museum. So these are copper lamps. This is called the golden eye. These are all, many of them are done out of scrap. This lamp is created out of old air conditioning tubes from scrapyard. So I do a lot of lamps, which this one actually I created thinking that I will generate the electricity through the waves and then make it and light it up. These are very simple lights in terracotta. Different phases of the moon. This is at Delhi-Gurgaon highway. These are Feen lamps. These are terracotta lamps and they are called petrified lovers. I must tell you the story of why I call them petrified lovers. I had an exhibition of these lamps in Priyadarshini Park in Mumbai. Now, this is a park which is near the Nepean Sea Road, I think, and then I had these lamps installed there. And this park was open at 6 o'clock in the morning. And at 6 o'clock, when the gate was about to be opened, hundreds of boys and girls would sort of crowd there. As soon as the gate was opened, they will rush to some corner, open their umbrella and start smooching. At 1 o'clock, the guard went there sort of trying to tell him, get up and go, time is over. And half their attention was their romance and half their attention was who is looking. So I decided to call my lamps petrified lovers. These are just with bamboo. These are lamps which are done with the construction ghamelas, the ghamelas which are used for carrying bricks and sand. So these are just cutouts on ghamelas. This is one of my first installations. You know, I had created a 1.5 meter large disc in copper for one of the hotel projects, a lamp. And before I handed it over to the hotel, I decided I will take it to the beach. I dug a crater in the sand and kept the disc on the top of it with the support from the bottom. We had electrical bulbs anyway at the bottom of the disc, and I took the electrical connection from a beach shack under the sand. And when I lit it, when I put the light on, I couldn't believe my own eyes. This was an installation which was completely accidental, and it appeared like a new planet. So I called it the 10th planet. So this is a completely accidental installation. And then I started working with sand and light, and I've done hundreds of installations with sand and light. This is called the memory of the sunset on the sand. These are just grooves of sand with light behind it. These are like cones. These are all temporary installations. This was an installation which was done for a BRICS meeting when there were 12 prime ministers visited Goa for the BRICS summit. And then they requested me to create an installation for their eyes only. And there was a air-conditioned cabin, a big hall which was made right on the beach. And my installation was outside this hall, which has a glass wall. The whole thing was with glass. And then they didn't realize that when the prime ministers arrived there was so much, it was so cold that all the glass was completely covered with mist, with moisture, and nobody could see it. Only and they were not allowed to go out for security reasons. So only the Russian ambassador walked with me outside, and so I had a look at the installation, and nobody else could. They, of course, paid me, but it was so disappointing because you create something like this and nobody was able to see it. Even the general public was not able to see it because of security reasons. So sometimes this also happens. Yeah, so yeah, so art has many functions, and I'm going to slowly talk about many. So art makes us more or less lonely. Art makes us connected with something. Art in the republic of art, there is nothing which is called, there is no duality. When you are sad, art basically connects you, any form of art. When I'm talking about art, I'm not only talking about the visual art, I'm talking about cinema, I'm talking about literature. So art has the power to make local universal. For example, when you are sad, you know that there is somebody else who is sad. If you're happy, then the art makes you believe that there must be a star somewhere in the universe who shares your joy. So art is a way of connecting people. Art is a universal language of mankind. I think I'm not able to read that, but it doesn't matter. I think I will continue. Yeah. Art has a power to give a divine glow to the mundane. Many times we discard many things. We don't look at many things. But then art gives a divine glow. Look at this famous painting of the shoe by Van Gogh. Now, a shoe is a very, ordinary thing, but the moment Van Gogh paints it, it gets a divine glow. It becomes something to be awed at. The potato eaters. This is my work, which is created using cow dung. But even the thing which is as mundane as cow dung can get a divine glow through art. This is a work which is done by a friend of mine with toilet cleaning brushes. It's a chandelier. Mm-hmm. This is Picasso's famous bullhead created with just a sit of a cycle. This is a famous artist from Japan who creates work with salt. The whole work is done with salt. You just have salt like rangoli, and this is the work created with salt. Yeah. So art has a power to demolish dualities, as I said. The world is divided by patriotism, religions, nationalisms, different ideologies. But art surpasses all that. Art is something which makes you tolerant. Now, I recently created a project in Yorkshire. Now, I took coconut husk from Goa, a container full of coconut husk from Goa to Yorkshire. I created a disc. On one side of the disc, there was a husk of coconut from Goa, and on the other side, there is the pine cones from Yorkshire. So this is a work which unites the East and the West. And then I think in the history of coconuts, this is for the first time that the coconut husk got snow. So art has a power to even bestow coconut husk with snow. This is a work which anybody will say this is the Surya Deva from India. Now, this is a sculpture which was excavated in about 13th, 14th century in Denmark. So this is exactly something which is like Surya Deva, which we see in our scriptures. So, art also tells you that art is a universal language. There's nobody who has a total what do you say? The Surya Deva is universal, and it is there in many cultures. The function of art is again tolerance. Can you imagine, for example, in a Hindu-Muslim riots which happen in this country, Allah Rakha or Bismillah Khan running with a dagger behind Bhimsen Joshi? This does not happen. That's because, look at this. These are Akarai sisters. basically Veda Bhitu, Purana Bhitu, this only comes when you sort of have this divine music. In the world of art, there is no Islam and there is no Christianity and there is no Hinduism. All gets connected. There are Dabar Bandhus, the Dabar brothers, who when they sing, they have a particular style of making hands like this. And somebody asked them, actually Ashok Vajpayee asked them, what are you doing? He said, Bhagwan ki aarti utar rahe hain. So, art can really connect with the divine, and the divine also becomes one. It's not just the humans which art connects, but art also connects the divine. It equalizes everybody. When there's a good concert of music or any other interesting thing happening, a theater, the audience, there may be very rich people in the audience, very poor people in the audience, but the response is a unifying response. The response, the appreciation of a poor and the appreciation of a rich is the same. In the Republic of Art, there are no dualities. There is no rich and poor. There is no upper caste and lower caste, the material and the spiritual, the cheap and the expensive, fast and the slow, good and the bad. There's a very nice poem by Rumi which says, beyond the field of the right and beyond the field of the wrong, there is another field. Let us meet there. So art holds your finger and takes you to that field, which is the field which is beyond the right and the wrong. The art provides a space for dialogues. It's a kind of a soft power of art. So this is a work which I recently did again in Yorkshire, which is called Dialogues. It's also a play upon the word log, because this was created with pine logs. Art teaches us to think plural, to accept many points of view, and to doubt. Today, the problem with the world is most foolish people are very sure of themselves, and most intelligent people doubt. And art, basically, if one lesson the politicians can learn from art is to doubt. And art has always doubted. Look at this little poem from Rig Veda. This poem says, from where it was born, from where came this creation. Perhaps the gods were born after the creation, and maybe he has created it, or maybe he has not. Perhaps he will know, perhaps the God will know, perhaps the God will not know. So this doubt that even the God is not very sure who created this is the kind of a function of art. Human beings have a few needs which are beyond the needs of animals. The animals need food, shelter, and clothing. They're happy with if there is enough food, there is shelter. But human beings have needs which are beyond this. And one of the most important needs of human beings are basically memory, history, time, spirituality, and eternity. These are the kind of ideas which are only special to human beings. Now, history we are very interested in history, interested in memory. For example, a dog is not interested in what dogs existed 200 years ago. He is just happy with the dogs playing around with him, maybe interested in a good-looking beach on the other road. But otherwise, the dog is not really interested in history. But human beings have a need for history. And these needs, all these needs which I have jotted down there, are looked after, taken care of by art. When my father passed away, I made portraits of my father. Right from the age of 6 to the age of 16, I walked every day with my father for 2 hours. On the seaside, on the hillside, on the riverside, because we always lived near the seaside, riverside. And those walks were the most important to me, and those walks were sort of my education. Because I was in very, very small village schools, and the walks with my father were so important. When he passed away, I made about 500 portraits of my father and planted them in all the places we walked. Now, this is an act of creation of art, is an act which is sort of preservation of the memory. The pyramids are the preservation of the memory. I'm going to show you a small work which is one of my favorite works as far as this subject memory goes. In Longest Day is a film which is about the last day of the Second World War when the Allied forces come to France and liberate France. So this is it's a very, very important film. I will not go through the whole thing. coming from England. On that day, 35,000 Germans, French, Americans, and the civilians were killed on that day. And we have cemeteries, which are cemeteries of all the soldiers. And there's also the son of the American President Roosevelt, who died on that day. Now, an artist creates a work in response to this history. It's called The Fallen. It's by Andy Moss and Jane Wadley. On the beach where this happened, he creates these fallen soldiers with a very, very simple technique. It is just a cutout on a cardboard, and the sand is ruffled. The wet sand comes out. I think it's a very powerful work in memory of people who died on that day, the longest day. Because the sand underneath the dry sand is wet, and so when you just take a stick and ruffle it, this is what happens. This is my work in connection with the architecture. There are lots of old Goan houses are crumbling, so I pick up the walls of these houses, which have crumbled, and I realized that there are many layers of paint. In Goa, there is a tradition that before Christmas, everybody paints their house with chuna. Now, of course, we don't have to do it because we have antifungal colors, but before the antifungal colors came, you just mix chuna with either red oxide, which makes it red, indigo, yellow ochre, and white was reserved for the local church or the chapel. So this house was about 150 years old and was painted 150 times. And there were many layers of paint. So all that I did was took the pieces, mounted them on a plywood, and started carving on it to reveal the colors, to reveal history. And it's called 150 Christmas Celebrations. I have an old sculpture like this. This is from the Ashokan period. It's in the Bihar Museum. When you look at a sculpture, which is, this is about 5,000 years old, and when you look at a sculpture, whether it's in Yakshi or in Ajanta Ellora or anywhere, the sculpture also looks at you. So art establishes some kind of communication with the past. You know, time is something which is also a field which is looked into by art. We all want to remember that time has no pity for anybody. I would say that the time sometimes can be captured and can live in art. I will give you a few interesting examples. Taj Mahal is a very interesting example about how time can be captured. It is a poem, I think, by Tagore. As you know, Shah Jahan lost his empire, but his wish was to make imperishable his love for Mumtaz. So he creates Taj Mahal. And then he is imprisoned by his own son, Aurangzeb, and he dies, as the story goes, looking at Taj Mahal. So Tagore says, you, Shah Jahan, you allowed your empire to perish, but your wish was to make imperishable a teardrop of love. Time has no pity for human heart. It laughs at our struggle to remember. But you, Shah Jahan, you allured time with beauty, made him captive, and crowned the formless death with fadeless form. That is Taj Mahal. Centuries pass by, empires are reduced to dust, but the night still sighs to the sky, I remember. So art has this power to sort of capture time and make him captive. This is a work by a friend of mine from Mumbai. His name is Narendra Yadav. You know, he goes to Chor Bazaar, and in Chor Bazaar, he gets a wooden ruler for 10 rupees. Now, I don't know why he buys it. He just buys it, brings it to his studio. He starts polishing it. When he, in wooden rulers had a scale printed on it. And the scale has disappeared because of time. And Narendra starts polishing it. And lo and behold, the center of the bark of the tree is at the center of the ruler. And so the ruler, from the scale of distance, becomes the scale of time. Because as you know, the concentric circles are a scale of time. So it's a very brilliant poetic work, which I love. I'm a student of Mahatma Gandhi, and see how art can, sort of relive time. Because of my connection with Mahatma Gandhi, I became a friend of Raj Mohan Gandhi, who is his grandson. and he connected me with a lot of Gandhi institutions. And I went to Delhi in the Gandhi Museum, and the director made me sit, and he knew that I was a doctor because Rajmohan Gandhi ji had told him. And as soon as I sat down, he opens a cupboard and gives me a file. That's the original medical file of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, I opened the file. There are many blood reports, urine reports, and letters written by the doctors to Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel. And there are 3 electric cardiograms. This is one of them, which was taken in Calcutta, I think in 35, I can't read it now. So this is a cardiogram of Mahatma Gandhi. As you know, any graph can be converted into sound. Even a doodle can be converted into sound, and there are even apps available on the internet for doing that. So I do precisely the same. Now what you are about to hear are the heart sounds of Mahatma Gandhi. All that I did was converted this graph into sound. Mahatma Gandhi had the kindest of heart. I think empathy was one of the most important things in his life. And I think art can make you hear Mahatma Gandhi's heart sound 70 years after his death. That's, again, the power of art. This is a work which is, again, connected with time. As I told you earlier, the high tide and the low tide happened because of the moon. So I went to this beach during low tide, early morning at 5 o'clock. We had already collected on the previous day shells, and we created a moon with shells. And then I waited for the high tide to come and drown the moon, which is responsible for the tide. So the tide which is created by the moon drowns the moon. So that is the poetry of this work. Yeah. So this is, again, time is one of the factors in creation of this work. Art and spirituality. I basically believe that, slowly, spiritualism is disappearing from religions. I'm talking about all religions. What is remaining is basically the ritual. What is happening is essentially the ritual. And I feel the final resting place of spirituality is arts. And I have created some works. Well, art was always a prayer. Creating art and selling it in the museums and in the galleries is a new phenomena. Art was always created as a devotion. If you go to the temples of Ajanta and Ellora, this is Ellora temple, it was a sheer prayer. Carving was a prayer. There's a story of Kumar Gandharva and Madhu Limay. During emergency, Madhu Limay was imprisoned in Bangalore because of his opposition to emergency. And he was a great connoisseur of music. So Madhu Limay was an important socialist leader. He writes to Kumar Gandharva. He says, Kumarji, every day I am listening to your music. He's in the prison. He doesn't know when he will be let loose. But every day he listens to Kumarji's music, Kumarji's songs. And he says, Kumarji, when I listen to you, I feel I have touched the mysteries of the universe. So he's not singing, he's only listening. Even listening to music can make you touch the mysteries. That is the power of art. I feel when those who do not appreciate art, those who do not connect with art, I really feel sad for them because, as human beings, we are human beings because we create art and we appreciate art. That's what gives us the special status as human civilization. To use architectural language, I would say that art is the cornerstone of human civilization, or art is the foundation of human civilization. And to use medical language, I would say that art is the womb in which civilizations are born. So art is the womb in civilizations are born, and Madhu Limay could sort of touch the divinity just by listening to music. And this is one of my work which talks about what I just said, that spiritualism is becoming only ritual. SPI is white, ritual is studded with gold. Yeah, I think I'll skip this. So all spiritualism rests in art. There is another thing that art makes us connect to is about death and immortality. Everybody has to die, but it's only through art that we sort of give death a completely different status. If you read the poetry is connected with death, if you read, see the paintings or any other works of art connected with death, then we sort of come in terms with death. Art helps us to almost shake hands with death. So there is a very famous poet in Goa. His name was Bakiba Borkar. You know, in Goans we love fish. So fish is Anna Brahma for us, coming from Goa and also Bengal. So one day Yama comes to his door, knocks on his door and says, I have come. So Mr. Borkar tells Yama, please not today. Today there is good fish curry rice for dinner. Come tomorrow. So that's only possible when you're a poet and when you connect with art. Only when I shall drink from the lake of silence, I shall begin to sing. Only when I have reached the top of the mountain, then I shall begin to climb. And only when my limbs have been consumed by the earth, I shall begin to dance. That is the power of poetry, which brings you to in terms with death. And to end my talk, I would narrate another wonderful story. Many people ask me, all these works which you create, many of them are temporary, but will your works be remembered? So I will again quote a Tagore poem to answer that, because art is something which brings us close to eternity. I will say, when death knocks on my door and says your time has come, I shall tell death I never lived in time, I lived in love. And when death asks me, will your sculptures be remembered forever? I shall say I do not know, but when I created them, I felt eternity. Thank you very much.